There's a moment you may not even notice, a slow, invisible fracture that happens while you smile, while you succeed, while you do everything you were told would lead to happiness. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins the first time you silence your real thoughts to keep the peace. The first time you wear a version of yourself that feels easier to love. The first time you abandon the quiet voice inside you, just to survive the day. Carl Jung warned us, when you trade your soul for belonging, even unconsciously, you don't just lose yourself. You begin to die slowly from the inside out. Not a death the world sees. Not a death anyone grieves. But a death you feel in the small hours. When the applause fades. When the mask grows heavy. When even your victories taste like ash in your mouth. You might still achieve. You might still be admired. But the cost is staggering, the slow erosion of the self you were born to become. And if you don't know how to hear the soul's quiet rebellion, you risk losing it completely. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you may finally see the moment your soul began slipping away, and more importantly, how to begin calling it back. It doesn't happen all at once. The death of the soul is a slow, almost invisible thing. It begins the first time you swallow your real feelings to make someone else comfortable. The first time you trade truth for belonging, even if you never meant to. You learn quickly what earns you love. What wins you approval. What makes you easier to understand. So you adjust. You edit yourself. You bury the parts that feel inconvenient, the anger, the dreams, the hunger for something more. At first, it feels harmless. Necessary even. You believe you're being wise, keeping the peace, protecting your place in the world. But every small silence leaves a scar. Every forced smile leaves a crack. You build a life out of choices that look good from the outside, but each one pulls you a little further from the life that could have been yours. You tell yourself you're strong. You tell yourself it's maturity. You tell yourself it's just what it means to be loved. But in the quiet places, the places you don't show anyone, something begins to hollow out inside you. The soul doesn't die with a scream. It dies with a sigh. A giving up. A slow surrender to a life that demands everything but your real self. You show up at work. You show up in relationships. You become everything they hoped you would be. And yet you feel less and less alive inside your own skin. Carl Jung warned of this long erosion. How living too long inside the expectations of others creates a mask so complete that even the soul forgets it has a face beneath it. You achieve. You serve. You perform. And inside, the real you grows thinner by the day. Until one day, the victories feel empty. The smiles feel foreign. And you realize, the life you've built doesn't belong to anyone anymore. Not even you. This is not weakness. This is not failure. It's the inevitable consequence of surviving in a world that asks you to disappear to be loved. And if you stay in that survival too long, the soul you once protected quietly slips away. You can only abandon yourself for so long before the cracks begin to show. At first, they're small, easy to ignore. A flash of irritation in the middle of a conversation you should care about. A hollow ache after a success that leaves you emptier than you expected. The quiet resentment that builds when you realize you are always what others need, but never what you need for yourself. Carl Jung called this the danger of the persona, the mask we create to survive society's expectations. It isn't a lie. It's an agreement you made without knowing you signed it. You learned which parts of you were lovable, and which parts made others pull away. You learned to present the version of yourself that the world could accept, while exiling the parts that felt inconvenient, messy, complicated. Over time, that mask becomes second nature. You don't even realize you're wearing it. But deep underneath the surface, the parts of you abandoned have not disappeared. They wait in the shadow. The repository of everything you were told to hide. Your anger. Your tenderness. Your dreams. Your grief. And while the persona smiles, works, achieves, the soul begins to grow quieter. The self you were born to be starts to starve. In modern psychology, we now know that this internal split leads not just to emotional numbness, but to a quiet, chronic exhaustion. A life that feels heavier than it should. A self that feels hollow even in moments that should be joyful. You're not lazy. You're not ungrateful. You're not broken. You're carrying the weight of a life that was never fully yours. And the longer you continue, the more the mask hardens. Until the day comes when you no longer remember where the persona ends, and the soul begins. This is the real danger Jung tried to warn us about. Not just losing connection with others, but losing connection with the one thing you can never replace. Yourself. And the longer you stay hidden, the harder it becomes to find your way back. What if the exhaustion you carry, the quiet sadness you can't explain, isn't a personal failure at all? What if it's the soul's last language? The final way it knows how to tell you, you've been living too far from yourself. Carl Jung believed that suffering, when understood properly, was not the enemy, but a message. A sacred signal that the self had been buried too deep beneath the demands of the outer world. The truth is, you were never supposed to become a flawless mask. You were never supposed to bend and shape yourself until there was nothing left but the echo of other people's expectations. The part of you that still aches, that still feels restless even when everything looks perfect. That part is not your weakness. It's your soul remembering. It's your soul refusing to be erased. You were not meant to live a life that only looks good from the outside. You were not meant to survive in someone else's dream. You were meant to belong first to yourself. To the deep, wild, imperfect being you've carried all along. The pain you feel is the proof you are still alive inside the armor. It's not asking you to fight harder. It's asking you to listen. Because somewhere beneath the persona, beneath the silence, the smiling, the endless pleasing, someone real is still waiting to come home. And the soul does not die easily. It waits, patiently, for the day you are finally willing to remember who you are without them. You don't need to burn your life down. You don't need to scream or disappear or start over from nothing. You only need to stop long enough to notice, when the performance begins, and when the soul quietly withdraws. Most people never pause long enough to feel it. The quiet ache behind the practiced smile. The subtle dread that arrives after every achievement. The way certain conversations drain you, not because you dislike the people, but because you're not allowed to be real around them. Carl Jung believed that the healing of the soul begins not with transformation, but with truth. Not a dramatic awakening, but a soft, steady return. The return begins in moments like these. When you feel the mask stretched too tight, and choose not to adjust it. When you feel the pull to say the right thing, and instead, say the honest thing. When you feel the urge to be impressive, and instead, choose to be human. These are small rebellions. But they are sacred. Because with each moment of truth, the part of you that was exiled begins to stir. The self you thought was lost begins to breathe again. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about making space for someone ancient, someone you've carried all along. The soul doesn't return through perfection. It returns through permission. Permission to feel, to want, to disappoint, to belong to yourself again. And that kind of healing doesn't shout. It doesn't need applause. It just needs space. Not for noise, but for noticing. Because the moment you stop trying to be what they need, is the moment your soul begins to believe it's safe to come home. What if the real reason you feel so tired isn't because you're doing too much, but because everything you do costs a piece of your soul? Not loudly. Not all at once. But slowly. In every moment you choose harmony over truth, safety over freedom, admiration over authenticity. You've spent years trying to be good, trying to be loved, trying to be what they could understand and accept. But who have you been, underneath all that trying? Who is the self you left behind the day you realized it was easier to be like than to be whole? Carl Jung believed the soul doesn't vanish. It recedes, waits, until the inner world is quiet enough to be heard again. So maybe the real question isn't how to fix your life, or even how to find yourself. Maybe the real question is something much smaller, but infinitely harder to answer. What truth have you been silencing, just to be accepted? And what would happen if you let it speak? If this resonated with you, share it with someone who might need it too. And if you're ready for more, subscribe and stay close. We're just getting started. The soul doesn't vanish, it waits. Beneath the noise. Beneath the pleasing. Beneath the life you built to survive. It waits for the moment you finally stop pretending. The moment you stop performing. The moment you remember, you were never meant to live for them. You were meant to come home, to the self that never stopped whispering beneath it all.